Good evening once again, and welcome to the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University. I'm Richard Arenberg, visiting professor of the practice of political science and a senior fellow at the Watson Institute. I'm honored to serve this year as interim director of the Taubman Center, which is a part of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. The Taubman Center seeks to impact American politics and policy through scholarship, public opinion polling, conferences, workshops, academic research, internships, and a robust series of speakers drawn from experts, the media, academia, think tanks, and public officials. This year, we've been placing special emphasis on the 2020 national elections and the events which have followed as a new administration and the nation grapple with issues of public health crisis, social justice, education, the economy, and the commitment to the rule of law, with a roster of outstanding speakers and programs. Tonight, we present the 27th in our series of programs this year. We're pleased that large numbers of Brown students, faculty, alumni, and other interested people have been joining us for these events. We're very honored tonight to have as our special guest the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Josh has been Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania since 2017 and was elected to a second term this past November. AG Shapiro served as a state representative representing District 153 from 2004 to 2012 and as chair of the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners. His early career included work on Capitol Hill as Chief of Staff to Pennsylvania Congressman Joe Hoeffel from 1999 to 2003, and on the staffs of Congressman Peter Deutsch and Senators Robert Torricelli and Carl Levin. It's with Senator Levin, who was here at the Taubman Center just last week, where in 1995 and 1996, he began his career on Capitol Hill and where we first met. He holds a BA from the University of Rochester and earned his law degree at Georgetown. He lives in Abington, Pennsylvania, where he lives with his wife, Laurie, and their 4 children. Over recent months, in the wake of the 2020 election, as Attorney General of a key contested swing state, Pennsylvania, he stood at the center of the storm created by then President Donald Trump's refusal to accept the outcome of the election. My conversation with Attorney General Shapiro tonight will last for approximately until 8 o'clock, following which we will take questions from the audience. You may enter questions through the Q&A function, which will be viewable to me. You may begin entering questions if you have them already, beginning now and throughout the program. Please keep them short and to the point. I will convey as many of these questions to the Attorney General as we have time for. The event is being recorded for later viewing, available on the Taubman Center website or the Watson Institute website. It's also being live streamed on YouTube. Now it's a great honor for me to introduce my friend, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Welcome to Brown.
Hey, Rich, it's wonderful to see you, and it's great to be at Brown. I wish I could be there physically, but it's wonderful to be able to zoom in and have a few moments to talk to you, the students, faculty, and our guests. So thanks for having me.
We'll do it in person at some future date.
Good.
Well, in preparing for this interview, I saw that Philadelphia Magazine reported just last week that you're preparing to run for governor of Pennsylvania next year. They quote you as saying, "I expect to be a candidate And if you tweet that tomorrow, I'm going to be very upset. I hope you're not very upset, but are you running?
Well, Rich, I appreciate the question. Look, I'll leave a direct answer for sometime later this summer, and it'll be directly to the good people of Pennsylvania. But as I said in that article, I expect to be a candidate. Right now, I'm really focused on our work. Believe it or not, we're still trying to clean up from the last election and the mess that the former president left us. So I'm going to leave it at that. But I do want to just say a quick thing about it in response to your introduction. And I hope everyone watching here knows why I'm here tonight, notwithstanding my great respect and admiration for Brown and the Taubman Center. It's because Rich Arenberg was nice to me when he didn't have to be. And I genuinely mean that. And it taught me a really wonderful lesson in life, Rich. I was a 22-year-old or something intern for a very senior United States Senator, Carl Levin, who you all met last week, it sounds like. And man, I was just trying to sort of soak up every bit of knowledge I could. And I wandered down to the end of our office, to Rich Arenberg's office, which had an unbelievable amount of paper, piled high on his desk.
You can see this desk. It looks the same way, by the way.
Oh my gosh. And he had such a serious job to manage everything for Senator Levin. And yet he still took time to be kind and answer my questions. And that's one reason I'm here. The second reason is because Carl Levin taught me how to ask questions. And I think that ability to ask probing questions makes you a better policymaker and a better elected official. And so, Rich, when you asked me to be here tonight, I thought, well, you were nice to me and you and Carl taught me how to ask questions. So now I damn well better sit here and answer some that you have. So thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you. You were, even at that young age, very clearly a rising star.
Thank you.
And we all knew it. Former President Donald Trump, in the aftermath of the 2020 election, as I said earlier, persisted in promoting the false narrative that the election was stolen and that massive fraud had occurred in states around the country. Much of his focus was on Pennsylvania. As Attorney General, you were called upon to answer the increasingly frivolous lawsuits in the courts. Describe what it was like to face this historic big lie with the future of American democracy on the line.
Yeah. For us, it really began in the early days of 2020. We were faced with, this unprecedented pandemic, which scattered my team as it did others, many of us to our homes. We knew that we were going to face a very serious and tough and close election cycle, just given the nature of our politics today. And then you layer on top of that the attacks that were coming from the former president, even long before really Joe Biden was selected as the nominee, and long before a single vote had been cast. Hell, many of them hadn't even registered yet. And here in Pennsylvania, we were faced, because of the pandemic, with pushing our primary back. Typically, it's around April, and instead it was pushed back until June. Around the same time that people were trying to figure out how to vote in the midst of a pandemic, I got my team of lawyers and agents together, and I'll tell you, in the office of the Pennsylvania Attorney General, we've got about 1,000 people who work for me. We have both criminal and civil jurisdiction. And unlike the federal structure where you've got the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, we put all that together. We have agents and lawyers all under my command. And so right around that primary in June, after seeing what the president had already begun saying, I got my team together and said, we're going to form 3 squads. One squad is going to be everything leading up to Election Day. The other squad, mostly our criminal folks, we're going to focus on Election Day. And then we would have our folks who were skilled at appellate work and Supreme Court work be prepared to deal with whatever would come post-Election Day, at 8:01 p.m., Rich. And those teams got together and we worked every single day to prepare to ensure that we had a smooth and safe election here in Pennsylvania. And we did. In fact, we only had 3 examples of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and all 3 were individuals who tried to vote for Donald Trump more than once.
Right.
Leading up to Election Day, we were sued 19 times by the president, his campaign, or his enablers, and we went 19-0. And post-Election Day, after they tried very hard to make it harder for people not to vote, or harder for people to vote, pardon me, 21 times after Election Day, we were sued to try and make it harder for those votes to count. And we won every one of those lawsuits as well. And so for us, dealing with the big lie required us to do outstanding legal work, and our team did. And then we also recognized that it required me as the face of the office, the leader of the office, to be out front just telling the truth and calming people's nerves and letting them know not only what was at stake, but what these legal challenges were really all about, how we were going about fighting back against them. And then after we won, letting them know, not beating our chest that we won, right? That's good for us, but rather you won, you the voter won, and here's what that means for you. And so that was the process. Forgive me, I've got 4 kids and 2 dogs. That was the process that we went through leading up to Election Day to combat the big lie.
Well, you and a handful of other state officials around the country really stood firm in the breach, and you're to be congratulated on that.
I will say, it did thrust into the limelight or the focus of the American people, folks who oftentimes aren't noticed, right?
Yeah.
The clerks of
Right.
your county election boards,
Right.
secretaries of state, state attorneys general. Many people answered that call, and it was individuals who filled that breach, and it was individuals who ensured that our democratic institutions would survive this. They've been beat up and banged up. I'm sure we'll talk about that here tonight, but it was those individuals that made this possible. We owe them a debt of gratitude.
Yeah, we came close to the edge, really.
We did.
It was a few people in a few places that really saved the day, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I've thought a lot. I don't mean to jump around so much here, Rich, but I've thought a lot about
Great.
I've thought a lot about January the 6th, and I've thought a lot about what heretofore was basically a ceremonial process of counting the Electoral College votes. I mean, you went through it many times in your leadership role in the United States Senate. And I came to the conclusion that day that there were no real guardrails left on the Republican Party. Convinced that if Mitch McConnell had a speaker, whatever his name is, McCarthy, whatever, from California, if he were the speaker and they had the ability or the votes to overturn the will of the people in Pennsylvania and in Georgia and in Michigan and Wisconsin, I firmly believe they would have, which further, by the way, elucidates the broader point you made a moment ago about those state actors, those county actors that filled that void. I mean, they are people who fulfilled their oath of office while there were members of Congress, heck, just minutes after that insurrection, who violated the oath to the United States Constitution that they took. And so to me, I think it just further, as I said before, elucidates the point that there are actors that are to be commended, and then there are actors that I think we all also have to recognize in this country are unmoored and have no guardrails anymore, and that's very dangerous for our democracy.
I'd like to ask you a little further about one of those cases.
Sure.
President Biden, of course, as you know, won the state of Pennsylvania by about 70,000 votes.
Mm-hmm.
The one specific claim that Trump made was that the Democratic Secretary of State and the Democratic State Supreme Court justices illegally abolished the signature verification requirements just 11 days prior to the election. I believe this claim was so patently false that his lawyers declined to make the claim in court. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, they made some pretty outlandish claims in court, which we're going to address through the sanctions process. But They made many insane allegations like this one that you just said in their press conferences. This one they never even brought to court. It was just complete nonsense.
The Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, attempted, with the support of 17 Republican attorneys general and former President Trump, to get the Supreme Court to throw out the results from 4 swing states, including Pennsylvania. You've called for Paxton to be sanctioned or disbarred, and you've called Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, a nutball, close quote. How do you really feel?
I mean, Giuliani's a clown, and you know, I am honored to serve alongside 56 other attorneys general when you figure in the District of Columbia and the territories, things like that. And I, you know, I respect many of my colleagues, and I work closely with them, Democrats and Republicans. I think attorneys general tend to be a relatively nonpartisan group. This election tested that. But when Ken Paxton of Texas did what he did, the lawsuit he filed, you know, first off, was uniquely unserious. And second off, and I use this word purposefully, and I think it was the first time it was introduced into the sort of lexicon of the moment, was I called it a seditious act. Because what Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, went to the United States Supreme Court to do was to throw out the votes of the people of Pennsylvania, was to undermine the will of the people of our Commonwealth. Take this to its logical conclusion. Had he won that lawsuit somehow, that would have meant that any state in the union who didn't like the political choice of another state could go to the Supreme Court and successfully overturn that. You basically just needed to, you know, control the Supreme Court in order to be successful. That would have been the end of our representative democracy. It truly would have. And I think what he did was an act of sedition. I think it was designed not to fulfill his oath to the Constitution, but rather this seemingly this oath that he and many others took to Donald Trump. And thankfully, the Supreme Court, notwithstanding its you know, conservative to liberal makeup, saw through it and very quickly threw out that junk lawsuit. As we go forward, and you know, nutball's probably you know, I'm not a big name caller, but you know, maybe when you're in the heat of the moment, you say some things. That's probably an inappropriate term to use. I think what Giuliani and Powell and some of these other folks did deserves to be sanctioned. We are exploring that. I can't really say much more than that right now. It is one thing, and you're a veteran of Washington, you've seen this before. It's one thing to go to a press conference and spew a bunch of baloney. It's a whole other thing to use our courts, federal and state courts, to perpetuate that big lie. And that is not something that I will tolerate. And I don't think that's something the American people should tolerate. And we're certainly not done yet dealing with those lawyers.
Good. I want to ask you about the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. As someone who spent 34 years working in that building, the symbol of American democracy, it felt very personal to me. I've mentioned this a few times. My wife and I were married in that building. I know you worked there for a number of years also. Do you share the view that then President Trump incited the riot on that day with his unfounded claims about election fraud and his invitation for the crowd to join him in a march up Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol, where the Electoral college ballots were being counted by the Congress?
I do think that he was directly, he directly incited that insurrection. If I were a United States Senator, I would have certainly voted to convict. It is clear to me that all of the evidence, when you gather it beginning back to early 2020, with the false narrative, with the false claims, with these ridiculous lawsuits, all leading up to the big lie, getting his followers, whipping them into a frenzy, calling on them to go to the Capitol, singling out certain people who had a role in that day, like the former Vice President Mike Pence. It is clear to me that the former president's conduct directly led to the insurrection. I will tell you, watching that play out that day, I was back here in Pennsylvania working, but watching it on TV, Rich, I was angry. I was saddened. It's been many years since I worked in that building, but it's still, you still feel the nooks and crannies of it, and you know what the hallways feel like and what the tiles feel like under your shoes that you're walking on. And to think that shoes walking down those halls were carrying Confederate flags and breaking windows and putting members of Congress's lives at risk. That's absolutely unacceptable. I'll tell you, as the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we're working closely with our federal partners to make arrests from those who participated in the insurrection. I don't believe that the president should be immune from responsibility and culpability for that. We'll leave that to prosecutors now that the United States Senate didn't have the backbone to do what, frankly, it should have done. But make no mistake, you can draw a straight line between the president's words and the actions that occurred on January 6th. We see every day in law enforcement, and this has been well reported, we've seen an uptick in the number of hate crimes and hate incidents all across this country. And you can draw a direct line in those cases to the words of a leader, whether online or through a speech or what have you, that incite a lot of that activity. Well, the same is true for the president. His words directly incited certain people to act. And there were other examples where his words were allowed to be misappropriated by white supremacists and other hate groups that use them as an excuse to carry out not just the crimes that occurred on January 6th, but other conduct that's occurred in our communities over his time in office.
And I think we were all fatigued by how outrageous all of this was. And because of that, I think for most people, there's not a full appreciation, again, of just how close to the edge we came. How much worse of a catastrophe that could very easily have been.
Yeah, well, I mean, without a doubt, and it goes back to a comment I touched on earlier. If you had a different political makeup in the Congress of the United States, if Nancy Pelosi were not the speaker, I have no doubt that the president would have bullied those Republican members of Congress, those Republican senators, into overturning enough of the electoral votes to try and change the outcome of the election and overturn the will of the people. But for the political majority that existed in the House for the Democrats, that didn't happen. But that's a dangerous thing for our democracy, that we were that close. I don't know what the margin is in the House. I think it's only 5, 6, 10 seats, something like that. I mean, that's incredibly close. And it would have signaled an end to our democracy. As it is, our institutions have been battered. We've got a lot of truth telling to do in this country. It's why centers like yours and others across the country are so important, to speak political truths, to hear opinions on the left and the right and have vigorous debate, but at least have a basic set of facts that we can agree upon for those debates. We got away from that in this country for a long time, and it's going to take a lot of work to get back to that. But yes, we teetered on the edge on January 6th, and we've got a lot of repair work to do right now.
Sure. I mean, you worked in the House for a number of years. Would you have ever thought that you'd see the day when members of Congress had to walk through a magnetometer to get onto the floor?
I know. I mean, one of the things that was always so extraordinary about the Capitol, I'm sure you felt this way, was it was sacred ground, right? I mean, you walked in there and you felt different. At least I did.
Yes.
There's a seriousness to it. But I never felt unsafe. And while there
Right.
were police around, you never felt that there was this dominant police presence. In fact, one of the things that I always enjoyed so much as an intern was bringing around those groups from Michigan to see Senator Levin. And it was really easy to bring them in, right? I mean, they
Sure.
walked in and they had their photo taken with the senator, and they
Yep.
got their, their tchotchkes or whatever, they get, and they had their tours. And so on the one hand, it was this sacred, special ground. On the other hand, it was really open. And now you wonder if either are true. You wonder if that sacredness has been stolen by, what happened on the 6th, and frankly, some of these members of Congress who have been elected, these QAnon members and others, and whether or not we'll really ever get back to, having a Capitol as open as it was before. That's a sad thing for our country, if not.
I agree with you. Certainly one of the most open public buildings in the world, really.
Yeah, for sure.
And prior to 9/11, you could drive your car right down the ramp under the Hart Building, and before you ever encountered someone who would ask to see your credentials.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of that's changed quite a bit, and hopefully it'll go back to normal. I think we all hope that.
I hope so. I mean, I worked on the Hill prior to 9/11, and I worked on the Hill. I was there on 9/11. And so I saw how it changed. But even with the restrictions after 9/11, particularly as they began to settle out, in the year or so after, it still felt that it was, the People's Congress, that the public was welcome there. And now I've been there since January 6th, but certainly in my conversations with my friends who are senators and members of Congress, they tell me it's very, very different now.
Yes. You mentioned the impeachment trials. I wanted to ask you, do you think in the wake of the 2 Trump impeachments and the 2 acquittals by the Senate, that the impeachment clause of the Constitution has lost its ability to restrain future presidential misconduct?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I wonder if it's not the Constitution that has lost its ability to restrain, but rather members of Congress who seemingly just got so taken. Many of them got just so taken by the fear of Donald Trump, or in some cases, I guess those who got the love of Donald Trump. They got so taken by that they forgot the oath to the Constitution that they took. And they really abrogated their responsibilities to the Constitution. I wonder if it says less about our Constitution. Certainly, our founding fathers designed it in a way that it could work, but it relied on people to carry it out. And I just don't know that we have people in the Congress of the United States, and certainly in the Senate of the United States, who have the character necessary to fulfill their obligations as United States senators. And by the way, that's not because I disagree with them on policy issues, or frankly, because I agree with them on some policy issues. It's because I think they've lost the kind of character that people had, a decade or 2 ago when Carl Levin served in the Senate and others did too. And they've really just become, these political players who are there to destroy the enemy, the other party, and support their president, former President Trump, at any cost, even if the cost is our Constitution. So again, I guess I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize, but I think it's less a reflection on the Constitution and way more a reflection on the lack of quality in the characters of some of the characters who exist in the United States Senate today.
Yeah, I think when we were there several decades ago, that Senate chamber was populated by some true giants. In both parties, by the way, and
I would agree,
capable of working across the aisle. And we seem to have lost a handle on that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And again, it doesn't mean that we can't have spirited disagreements, right? I mean, that's by the way, that's why you have a Senate, right? Is to have these spirited disagreements over tax policy, foreign policy, whatever the case may be. But I mean, just some of these individuals who are there right now, who will, refuse to put the institution of the Congress or the Constitution of the United States first, and instead they're just worried about their own reelection or some mean tweet or something like that.
Well, I think something that gets missed in all of the hullabaloo about changing rules and procedures and all of those fights that I don't want to drag you into, but I think one thing that gets missed is that the bottom line in a legislative body is, you said it, human behavior.
Yeah.
And what was different, I don't mean to sound like my grandfather talking about the good old days.
Yeah.
But what was different in the Senate, just not all that far into the distant past, was an appreciation for the need for restraint.
Yeah. Yeah. That doesn't exist anymore. And again, I think it's critically important that we remember our institutions are really only as strong as the people in it. I see it every day as the Attorney General. We arrest people every single day for criminal conduct. And, a lot of times, particularly when we're dealing with public corruption cases, and, they make the news or whatever, lawmakers and others will immediately say, we need to change the laws. And I'm like, well, actually, the laws are on the books. This guy broke them. That's why we're prosecuting him. What we really need, and true, and sometimes you need to tweak the laws and deal with changing situations or things you want to punish more severely or whatever. But by and large, we just deal with people who are bad actors who broke the law. And so I always respond with, well, I mean, you can tweak this law or that law, but at the end of the day, what we really need are actors who are going to follow the law. Same thing in Congress. We have an extraordinary constitution, something our founders, it's amazing what they were able to vision. Yet we right now, I think, have in some cases, an extraordinary group of, pathetic, sad sacks who are unwilling to, carry out their constitutional duties.
I want to ask you about Pennsylvania's Senator Pat Toomey. He was retiring at the end of this Congress.
Yeah.
He was one of 7 Republicans who voted to convict Trump. The state's Republican Party voted to rebuke him for that vote. Does this reflect a Trump-dominated GOP in Pennsylvania? Are Democrats and Republicans in the state able to come to the table and negotiate with each other on anything?
Yeah. Well, let me just say, as the Attorney General, I work with Republicans. I'm a Democrat. I work with Republicans all the time. I get a lot of stuff done. And I think it's critically important that you can be a proud Democrat, as I am, but you get elected, you take that oath of office, you have a responsibility to work with everyone. That's the way I do my job. As it relates to Pat Toomey, Pat's one of the guys I called on January 6th to make sure that he was okay. We have profound differences. I mean, I really disagree with him. I've campaigned against him. I assume he'll be campaigning against me in the future. That's okay. That's fine. I'm a big boy, and that's the way our system works. Sure. But I genuinely was concerned about him that day. And I think he saw something that day which triggered in him a responsibility he had to the Constitution and to speaking up, even though it was politically unpopular. In fact, he was considered to be, rebuked or what's word, censored, I guess is the censured is the word that they were exploring. In the end, I think they rebuked him and censured me somehow. I didn't know that the state Republican Party could do that. And I'm not really sure what that does to me, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. But he did get rebuked, or whatever terminology they used. And it 100% speaks to the fact that this Republican Party in our state is now controlled by the Trump apparatus. These are Trumplicans, not Republicans right now. And so how that plays out in the future, I don't know. But a state that elevated John Hines and Arlen Specter and Lawrence Coughlin and other, at the time, very moderate Republicans, Tom Ridge, moderate Republicans. We were considered a very moderate state. We're now as Trumpy as it gets when it comes to the Republican Party. And when Pat Toomey, the former president or chairman, whatever his title was, of the Club for Growth, is not Republican enough and gets rebuked by his own party and gets driven out of the party, and that's why he can't clearly run again for anything.
For a vote of conscience.
I mean, it's just extraordinary to me how far the party has gone. And look, as a Democrat, I'm not going to complain too loud. If they want to continue to drive their car off the track, I'm happy to let them do that.
It's a good segue into my next question, which is about Georgia Governor Brian Kemp just recently signed a new law controlling elections in the state of Georgia. That law is a pretty blatant effort to control elections in that state. It's a pretty blatant effort to suppress votes, actually, particularly those of people of color. A number of what we call red states are likely to follow. Right. What's your reaction to these voter suppression efforts? Are the provisions of the Georgia law likely to survive legal challenge? And how big a threat do they represent for American democracy?
Well, these laws that were just passed in Georgia are a direct threat to our democracy, and they must be stopped. And I hope that the courts do stop them. They're unconstitutional. Stacey Abrams, I believe, called it Jim Crow 2.0. She's right about that. And I will tell you that everyone watching this should be concerned, even if you don't live in Georgia, even if you have no stake to what goes on in Georgia, because it can happen anywhere, Rich. Right now, here in Pennsylvania, we have Republican House and Senate and a Democratic governor. And they have introduced in our legislature the second highest number of voter suppression bills than any other state. Thankfully, we have a Democratic governor. I hope we keep it that way, who will veto those bills. But if you just go back 7 years ago in Pennsylvania, we had a Republican governor in the same Republican legislature, and they passed an unconstitutional voter ID to try and make it harder for Black and brown people to vote, to try and make it harder for poor folks to vote. That's what these bills are designed to do, Rich, not to make it harder for guys who look like you and me to vote, but to make it harder for our Black and brown communities to vote by limiting the polling places there, by making it harder for folks to access their ballot, to disenfranchise people based on the zip code that they're in, to make them have to stand in line longer to vote in very uncomfortable circumstances, to make it harder to get a ballot to vote safely from home, whether it's because of a pandemic or some other issue. These are direct attacks on our democracy. They can happen anywhere. And Republican lawmakers across the country are trying to make them happen everywhere, including in Pennsylvania. I shouldn't say everywhere. There are some states where it's not, but everywhere in terms of states that are states that tend to tilt the balance in these elections. And so I'm going to remain very vigilant here in Pennsylvania, fight back against these attempts. Again, thankfully, we have a Democratic governor who will veto it. And I think all voters, no matter what your issues are, whether it's how much you pay in taxes or funding your kids' schools or whatever the case may be, this also has to be front and center on your issues that you care about. Because if they take away your right to vote, if they make it harder for certain votes and voices to be heard in our system, that undermines our entire democracy. And every single person has a stake in that.
Well, a related question. The U.S. Senate is about to take up H.R. 1, the sweeping voting rights bill, which was passed by the House. Among other things, it provides for automatic voter registration, nonpartisan redistricting commissions to eliminate gerrymandering, campaign finance disclosure provisions, and a requirement that presidents disclose their tax returns. Do you support all of these provisions?
I do, without question. I support this. I support the John Lewis Act. All of these things need to be passed. We need to make sure that everybody has access to the ballot box. And then once we do, and once we set those ground rules and they're etched in stone, then look, may the best woman or man win. Let's go out and have a good argument about ideas, and let's campaign our asses off, and let's try and convince the voters to vote for us based on our ideas, not based on how we can rig the system. Because what these Republicans are trying to do, and what the HR 1 and the John Lewis Act and those bills attempt to sort of counterbalance, is they're trying to take away your power, vest the power with the insiders, and say that certain voices don't count. And my view is that every legal eligible voice should be heard, and votes should be counted. And from there, we can then have the spirited exchange of ideas. But we have to maintain their participation in our system, and HR 1 is a great way to do that.
Do you think it can get through the Senate?
Well, look, I think this sort of brings up a broader discussion about whether or not we keep the filibuster. I mean, there are many issues I care deeply about that can't be done through reconciliation, like dealing with gun violence in our communities, dealing with voting rights, dealing with climate, and so many other issues that I'm not the expert you are in the Senate, but I know that you can't do everything through reconciliation. And so I think these senators have to have an honest conversation with themselves as to whether or not the filibuster, which is really a relic of the past, whether it is worth dying on that hill versus advancing, the kind of change that you work your whole political and governmental lives for. I mean, think about that for a minute, right? These senators spend years and years and years trying to get elected or getting elected, getting reelected, amassing the power that they need to amass to get something done. And then eventually they get to that point and they're told, geez, unless you got 60 votes, it doesn't get done. And in this political climate in the United States of America, I don't know that you get 60 votes for these things. I don't know that you can get 60 senators of one party, based on sort of where things are headed, unless, of course, Puerto Rico and DC become states, and then maybe you get a little bit closer if you're a Democrat. Mm-hmm. I don't get a vote on this. I mean, I purposefully elected not to run for the U.S. Senate, so my opinion doesn't matter a whole lot. But I do think it really comes down to: do you want to advance these issues like climate, gun violence, et cetera, voting rights, or do you want to just sort of stay married to this relic of the past, which has stymied a lot of progress over the years?
Well, I'll let you have the last word on that one for today.
Okay.
We'll come back to it some future time.
Sounds good.
Pennsylvania has been an important swing state, of course, in a number of recent elections. Trump carried the state in 2016 and Biden won it in 2020. Yeah. Winning Pennsylvania was a crucial element to winning the presidential election for both of them. The state benefits from the intense spotlight every 4 years because it plays a disproportionate role in presidential elections every 4 years. So how do you assess the demands to eliminate the Electoral College?
Well, Rich, I ran in both of those elections at the same time. I ran in 2016, and even when Hillary Clinton lost, I won. And I ran in 2020 and actually ran ahead of everybody else on the ticket, including President Biden. I saw firsthand what those presidential campaigns are like. And I'm not going to lie to you, I love the fact that Pennsylvania becomes central to the national conversation over the final 2 or 3 months of presidential elections, and has for many, many decades now. I have been an elector for 3 presidents, twice for President Obama and once for President Biden. Mm-hmm. I was proud to be selected by them to be an elector. And I always viewed it as an important, albeit somewhat ceremonial job, because really what we were doing, particularly because we didn't have faithless electors here in Pennsylvania, what we were doing was really just carrying out the will of the people in a ceremony. This election convinced me that we can no longer have a step in between the people's will and the ultimate outcome. And so I am now for abolishing the Electoral College and having a direct national popular vote. And my view is that presidential candidates will still come to Pennsylvania because we're big, we're diverse, we're important, and there's a lot of votes here. And so it's going to be, important for the Democratic candidate and the Republican to come here. But what we saw, as we talked about before on January 6th, and the tumult that led up to President Biden taking the oath on January 20th, is not something I think we should ever put this country through again. That risk that the will of the people could be thwarted, whether through a lawsuit like the one we saw, a seditious lawsuit like the one we saw from the Texas Attorney General, the efforts of a same party speaker and Senate leader as the president or the presidential candidate overturning the will of the people. We just simply can't afford to have that interim step anymore. And we need to, I believe, directly elect our presidents going forward.
Good. Well, during the 2020 campaign, there were quite a number of Democrats talking about increasing the size of the Supreme Court as a way of rebalancing the ideological makeup of the court. Is this something you favor?
No, I think what we see in our courts is that what matters, and certainly on the United States Supreme Court, is what matters most are the people who serve in those positions. And a duly elected president gets to nominate, and with Senate, confirmation, put people on the court who he or she thinks reflects their views the best, or can serve and can serve the United States the best on the Supreme Court. And so for as disappointed as I am to have a 6-3 court, certainly, and obviously we deal with the courts every single day, what's more important to me is that we have judges and justices that uphold the rule of law and check their ideology at the door, whether they are, pardon me, elected to the Supreme Court like they are here in Pennsylvania, or whether they are appointed to the Supreme Court or our federal courts as they are in Washington, D.C.
Do you feel that that is the case, that the individuals we have on the court here, I'm talking about the U.S. Supreme Court, fit that description?
I hope so. I mean, we have not seen a whole lot yet from
Right.
our newest justices.
Right.
They certainly, I would imagine, I never predict what the United States Supreme Court will do, but based on some of the things these justices, when they were judges, some of the opinions that they wrote and beliefs that they espoused, I'm very concerned about a woman's right to choose. I'm very concerned about the rights of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. I'm very, very concerned about the role that states are going to be able to have to protect its citizenry from unwarranted federal overreach. So there are a lot of issues that, certainly our planet is another one. There's a lot of issues that concern me, but, I think time will tell whether or not, particularly these Trump-appointed justices, will adhere to, stare decisis and to the rule of law, or whether they will be ideologues.
Just exploring this a little further, Republicans have focused their efforts for decades now on transforming the federal courts.
Yeah.
Over the past 4 years, these efforts have been quite successful, as President Trump was able to place more than 200 new judges on the federal courts over his term, 53 of them on the powerful circuit courts, and of course, 3 new Supreme Court justices. The Trump judges are mostly more conservative, more white, male, and younger than previous presidents' selections. So what I want to ask you is, why have the Republicans been so laser focused successfully on their agenda of putting judges on the courts, and Democrats so much less so?
Well, I think there are a few reasons for that. I mean, number one, it has been more of a political issue that Republicans have run on than Democrats, and they have placed more of a priority on it. I happen to think, and I think history backs me up on this, that one of the reasons why Republicans are, let's face it, they're very good at filling these judicial slots is because they don't have a whole lot of policy that they're for and things that they care about and stuff that they can run on. And so this becomes a proxy for a lot of other things, whether it's social issues or, other governmental issues. And so I think it is something that is easier for Republicans to run on and govern on. And let's face it, for as evil as I think Mitch McConnell is, he's was damn good at his job as majority leader. And I think in part it's because he didn't really care about a whole lot. There weren't policies that he wanted to get done. Contrast that with George Mitchell. Contrast that with a Tom Daschle. Contrast that now with Senator Schumer. When they were Senate majority leaders during your time there, Rich, there was a lot they wanted to get done. And there was a lot more focus on policymaking. And look at it right now. There's civil rights on the agenda. There's climate on the agenda. There's gun violence on the agenda. There's a lot that Democrats want to get done. Go back 10 years and it was healthcare on the agenda. I guess it's now maybe closer to 12 years. And so it is, I think, a product of the Democratic Party wanting to get a lot more done, that it doesn't tend to be a front burner issue. Joe Biden seems intent on changing that and diversifying our bench, particularly with the nominations that he made, I guess it was yesterday or maybe the day before. Mm-hmm. And so I'm encouraged to see him making this a priority, because I'll tell you, as the Attorney General, obviously we go to court a lot in our federal courts. And it was very different for us going to court in the early days of the Trump administration versus year 4 of the Trump administration after all those judges had been appointed. And so that's where we find ourselves. I hope Democrats make it more of a priority, but I can understand why historically it maybe has not been.
Okay, shifting gears a little, polls taken in the wake of the mass shootings in Atlanta and Boulder show about something like 61% of Americans support the House passed legislation to tighten background checks. Mm-hmm. I assume you support such common sense steps, but how far would you go? Do you support a ban on assault weapons and high capacity magazines? Are there other steps you've supported?
Yeah, we absolutely need universal background checks. And I come from a large NRA state, and a state where gun ownership has a proud and, by the way, responsible history. And that's something that I support and protect and defend all the citizens of my state. But we can't allow the Second Amendment to be a shield to cover up criminal activity any longer. And I think we need to pass these measures. One of the things that I've been particularly focused on, and I don't know if many of our viewers here tonight have heard this term before, Rich, but it's called a ghost gun or an 80% gun. If you haven't heard about it, Google it. These are going to scare you. And here's why they're going to scare you, because you can buy these things anywhere. You can buy them at gun shows, you can buy them online, and they come, basically, they're handguns or other types of guns that come in 2 parts. They easily get snapped together. You have a drill bit that drills a couple screws in, and you have a working gun. You might say to yourself, well, okay, I mean, you can buy a handgun anywhere, except when you go buy a handgun outside of Brown University or outside of the University of Pennsylvania, you go to the gun store or gun shows there, you have to go through a background check. Mm-hmm. With ghost guns, you do not need to go through a background check. And so we have prohibited purchasers, right? Felons and others who aren't allowed to buy guns, going to gun shows and filling up duffel bags full of these things, bringing them back to their homes, assembling them, and either using them to commit crimes or selling them illegally to make a profit, which is a crime, and then they're being used for criminal activity. They're the weapon of choice in Philadelphia, where we've seen our seizures of ghost guns go up 152%. Across Pennsylvania, we've seized 400% more ghost guns last year as compared to the year before, and this year, sadly, is going to shatter another record. As the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, I issued legal guidance saying that these should be regulated under our state laws as firearms. And most importantly, though, I've been working with the ATF and the Biden administration to get them to regulate these as firearms. And so what that would mean, and if you're a law-abiding citizen who's a gun owner who wants to buy a ghost gun, no problem. I'm not trying to take away your right to buy a handgun or a ghost gun. I'm just saying you need to go through a background check to do that. And if you're a law-abiding citizen, you agree with me on that we want to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. These are guns where there is just a glaring loophole that we have to close. And I'm working very hard here in the state and across the country to build the consensus to do just that.
I read somewhere that you recently called on Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and Jack Dorsey at Twitter to take action against anti-vaxxers spreading misinformation about the COVID vaccines. What's the social media's role in policing false information?
It's a great question, and it's one I struggle with every single day. I certainly struggled with it during the 2020 election cycle, not for my own campaign, but in witnessing the things that the former president was tweeting out every day. You know, on the one hand, I take very seriously silencing someone's free speech. And I tend to err on the side of not silencing speech as opposed to silencing it. What I believe needs to be done, though, on these social media platforms is better labeling of content that is just blatantly false, spreading false information about the COVID vaccine. This isn't about someone standing up and clearly articulating the fact that they don't want the vaccine, they think it's bad, they wouldn't advise their friends to get. Great. I mean, you can opine about that all you want. I'm going to disagree with you, and that's fine. But when you put out false information and label it as scientific data, I do think that there has to be a responsibility on these platforms to label it in a way that the consumer of that information, the person digesting that information, knows that these have been scientifically proven to be false. Or when the former president said that, you know, there were dead people voting here. No, they weren't. That has been proven to be false. And in fact, before they kicked him off Twitter, they labeled those tweets as being false. And so I'd like to see more of that when it comes to these topics where, you know, you can really dramatically and negatively impact the broader masses. If you let these conspiracies on the COVID-19 vaccine really take root and folks aren't getting vaccinated, who otherwise would have made the choice to do that, that's going to mean we're going to be meeting by Zoom for a lot longer. And, you know, our economy is going to be disrupted. Most importantly, we're going to lose a lot more lives. And so I think it's important that these platforms make clear, you know, what is true, what is not, what has been debunked, what is not, or what's questionable, not to limit people's opinions or free speech, but to make sure that, you know, stuff that is stamped as sort of factual has to go through a more rigorous process.
I want to turn to some audience questions, but before I do that, I always like to ask, when we have highly successful officials before us who've had great careers already, I know that it's very helpful to our students here at Brown. They're always very interested in hearing about how you got where you got to, and your advice to them if they want to, you know, wind up being, you know, an elected official someplace.
So I'll tell you what, I'd love to take a minute and speak to your students. And I'll share a story with your students of what happened to me and what led me down this path. And ultimately, Rich, what led me to do an internship in your office. It was the fact that I went to the University of Rochester in upstate New York because I had been inspired by my parents, my mom, a public school teacher, my dad, a local pediatrician, I'd been inspired to go to college to help people and learn a trade that would allow me to help people. And I thought for me, the best way I could help people and make a living was to be a doctor like my dad. At the same time, I was a pretty successful basketball player. You can't see my full physique here, but it is true that I am a short Jewish guy, but I actually was pretty good at basketball. I tell you that, and I tell the students that because my freshman year, I got cut from the men's basketball team and flunked out of pre-med on the exact same day. And when I thought my life was ending, right? I mean, I'm being overly dramatic, obviously, but when I thought, my career choices were ending, I should say it that way. Before I had the chance to call my family, my dad, mom, and tell them I was a complete failure, someone knocked on my dorm room door that night, Rich, and asked me if I wanted to run for the student, we called it the student senate, but it was our student government. And I thought, why would I ever want to do that? That's not anything that I was ever interested in. But I decided to run, mainly because I had nothing else going on in my life anymore. And I won, and I fell in love with service. We had all kinds of issues on our campus that were getting people all riled up. And I got in the middle of it. And by the way, at the end of my freshman year, decided to do something no other freshman had done, as I ran for student body president, and I won. And I started studying political science. And then I met a professor who encouraged me to spend a semester my junior year interning on Capitol Hill, which is where I met you guys. And so for me, what I really learned from that experience of getting knocked out and then taking advantage of that opportunity in front of me was to follow my passion and to study what I loved, which at the time was political science. And then when I got into my career, I never did a job or performed a task because I thought it would lead to the next one. In fact, when I left Capitol Hill in 2003 to go home and run for the state house, most of the guys I was a chief of staff with at the time, and you'll remember this dynamic, most of them were leaving the Hill to go make a lot of money lobbying. And I turned away from a lot of money to go run for office, something that most staffers actually don't do.
Right.
And a lot of people thought I was crazy. And then I won, and they thought I was pretty smart. And I know I wasn't, the dumbest guy in the room. I'm certainly not the smartest guy in the room. But what I did in that moment was not follow the path that others were following, but the one that I felt burning inside of me. Fast forward a few years later, I was, successful in politics here, and Chuck Schumer and others kept calling saying, you got to run for the U.S. Senate. This is back in 2016, I guess it would have been, against Pat Toomey. And I decided not to run because I wanted to be the attorney general instead. And everybody was like, he's the dumbest guy in the world. Why would he pass up an opportunity to run for the US Senate and run for AG? And then everybody else lost in 2016 except for me running for AG. And they said, man, he's the smartest guy in the world. And I'm, again, not the dumbest, not the smartest, but another example in my life where I tried to blaze my own trail and follow my passion. So to all of you students, what I would just say to you is there is no magic sort of book that lays out how your life is going to go. There is no class that you can take right now that is going to determine your destiny as a professional. There may be some prerequisites you got to take, certainly, but no one class, no one internship will. And so I would just encourage you to pursue your passion, to study what's interesting to you. My wife was an anthropology and sociology major at Colgate. I don't know that those two majors tend to lead to, careers in tech or jobs on the President's Advisory Committee for Information Technology or working in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. But that's exactly where it landed her, because she found herself excited and passionate about her studies, and she blazed her own trail and got there. Blaze your own trail, study what you love. Don't follow the conventional wisdom because it's never that wise, and just believe in yourself. That's what I would say to all of you. And you can always remember that I flunked out of pre-med and got cut from the basketball team and turned out okay.
Well, since I'm talking to an attorney general who's a basketball player, it puts in mind one of the quirky little stories about Washington that you probably know, but you know that on the the top floor of the Supreme Court, there's a basketball court up there that the clerks use, and I think it was built because when Whizzer White was still on the bench, who had been an All-American football player and wanted to stay in shape. But that's well known in Washington as the highest court in the land because it's above the Supreme Court.
That's right. That's right. It would be amazing. I've been inside the Supreme Court chamber. I've never been on that basketball court. That might be an even higher honor.
Well, let's turn to our audience for a couple of questions.
Sure.
Bill asks, in 2016, Donald Trump told us the election was rigged, and then he won. Why, in your view, did this not shatter his credibility? And he says in parenthesis, with anyone other than me.
Bill, he proved that you can lie repeatedly and still maintain credibility with a limited slice of the electorate. You would note that while he won in 2016, as a result of his conduct in office, his repeated lies, his campaign, whatever, he lost in 2020. And by the way, lost pretty overwhelmingly. I mean, Joe Biden scored a very significant victory, not just in the raw votes he got, but in winning states like Georgia and Arizona and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. So, to me, you only get away with it for so long. Donald Trump got away with it a hell of a lot longer than I thought he could have. But, why some people still follow him and believe him, notwithstanding the lies, it'll be an interesting experiment, probably less for the political scientists at Brown and more for the psychologists at Brown and the psychology majors at Brown.
In January 2005, Democrats in Congress challenged certification of the electoral vote in Ohio. Senator Boxer took up the cause in the Senate. How is that different from 2021's challenges?
I am not as familiar with the challenge that occurred in 2005, I guess the gentleman or the lady said. And I'm not trying to duck your question. I think it's a fair one. What I will tell you about the challenges in 2020 is that they were absolutely baseless. I mean, you had 8 Republican members of Congress from Pennsylvania literally stand up and say that the election that allowed them to win their seats was somehow rigged, and they should keep their seats, but Donald Trump should get his over Joe Biden. I mean, it's craziness, right? And so to me, it's not about the constitutional right to challenge something. Sure, a House member and a Senate member, assuming they combine, have a legal right to do that. I think that guy from Missouri, Hawley or whatever the hell his name was, he made that point over and over again. Yes, he's right on the law. The problem is they were basing it on complete lies, on things that didn't occur in Pennsylvania. And so when you have these outsiders combined with these 8 Republican members of Congress from Pennsylvania lie on the floor of the House of Representatives, by the way, minutes after the insurrection was cleared, right? But lie in a way that tried to take away our right to vote here in Pennsylvania and thwart the will of the people. To me, that just stood out as being different from anything else that had ever happened in the history of our republic, and that's why I've been so strong in speaking out against it, in trying to make sure that the facts got introduced. It was amazing, that night when the Republican members of Congress took to the floor to speak about what happened in Pennsylvania. I literally sat there, and this is not something I'd ever done before, and live tweeted responses to what they said, not in a way to, kind of express my opinion, but rather continually just pointing out the facts of what occurred, because their arguments were devoid of fact. So yes, they had a constitutional right to challenge it, but the basis they were challenging it on was completely made up. And I think it's important that we remember that facts do matter in this nation, and facts matter in this election. This was an election that was free and fair, and it was an election that produced a legitimate victory for Joe Biden here in Pennsylvania.
Great. Maria asks, what are steps that need to be taken for effective bipartisan work? Do you see this increasing or decreasing in the future?
Maria, it's got to increase. I mean, it's got to get back to a little bit of what it was before. I believe it's going to require a lot of truth telling. I actually believe it's going to require us to begin to agree on some basic common sets of facts again. And I think our political process is going to have to yield elected officials who are, more John McCain and less Lindsey Graham, right? When you want to look at the Republicans, and less QAnon and more, Ronald Reagan Republicans. I think if we can get back to folks who actually believe in country, believe in our Constitution, believe in a basic set of facts, then we can begin to have some dialogue again. And I realize that there are some people who are watching this Zoom who profoundly disagree with me, Rich, who think that, I'm all wrong because Democrats are to blame. And that's fine. I accept that criticism, but I have a point of view. I was asked to be here tonight and share it. I'm sharing it with you. And my view is that the Republican Party in this election cycle are the ones that walked away from a basic set of facts and walked away from that basic commitment to our Constitution. And we need to get back to that.
Bob asks, he says, I'm interested in both of your views on the national popular vote interstate compact. 15 states representing 196 electoral votes have passed it. Is it constitutional? Is it worth putting time and money into pursuing it in enough states to get to 270?
I support it. As I said, I support abolishing the Electoral College. I think that compact is a step that could be achieved, obviously, much more quickly if something is going to be achieved. As for putting time and money into it, I leave that up to you as an advocate to decide. Certainly, I'm for it. I've expressed my opinion. It's something I'll continue to push along, but I'm also focused on doing my day job as the AG here in Pennsylvania.
Has Pennsylvania passed it?
No.
No. Okay. Mark says, he says hello to you, and he says, we've supported you from your first election. Are you thinking of running for governor? I think we covered that.
Mark, thank you, Mark, for your support. And I think I ducked Rich's question at the beginning pretty skillfully, so I'm going to duck yours again. How about that?
Right. There was signed Vivian and Mark, by the way. So.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, sure.
I know who you are. I think your last name starts with a G, but I won't out you. Thank you, guys.
Well, let me ask you. The role of Attorney General, particularly in Pennsylvania, is very broad. A very wide range of responsibilities, consumer protection, various things. Is there something in your array of responsibilities that we haven't touched on that you'd like to emphasize?
Well, look, our office is the one that led the almost 2-year grand jury investigation into the sexual abuse of children at the hands of predator priests in the Roman Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. It was one of the first things I began working on when I became the Attorney General, or got elected Attorney General back in 2016. Our grand jury report found that there were 301 predator priests who abused thousands of children in a conspiracy and cover-up that went from dioceses here in Pennsylvania all the way to the Vatican. I am proud of what we were able to do for those survivors, those unbelievable survivors who shared their truth with us. I'm proud of the fact that predator priests are now spending their lives behind bars. I'm proud of the fact that 20 of my AG colleagues, 20 plus of my AG colleagues, have opened up investigations of their own into the abuse within the Catholic Church. I'm proud of the fact that the Pope himself acknowledged the truth of our work and convened a global summit to address it. There are people within the church like Cardinal Wuerl who lost their jobs because of what they did when they were here in Pennsylvania. That work, to this day remains, I think, some of the most important work our office has ever done, and certainly I've ever done in my life. And I'm just so proud of what those 23 grand jurors were able to do, and unbelievably proud of the survivors who had the courage to finally, after many years, come forth and share their truth. And I know that there are survivors out there in Pennsylvania and across this country who were inspired by them to share their truth. And as a result of that, whether it's a priest or a teacher or a police officer or someone else who was shielded by an institution was arrested or held accountable for their conduct. And that's because these survivors demonstrated an unbelievable capacity for strength. And I was proud to do that work.
Howard asks, what are the odds that one of the lawsuits against Donald Trump will succeed? Michael Cohn thinks the Southern District of New York is the scariest for him.
I don't think it would be prudent for me to comment on that, other than to say I think the president should be held to account if he broke the law.
Well, let me ask you give you the opportunity. I think you'll probably welcome this opportunity. We've got, as I mentioned before, a lot of Brown students in the audience. Typically, as we've gone through elections, cycle after cycle, the lowest rate of turnout for elections is the youngest group of voters. And I kind of wanted to give you the opportunity to provide kind of a commercial for our young audience, talking about why that's so important.
Look, I see a lot of really pressing issues, but when you think about the issues that are the most complex and the most challenging and have the most long-term negative impacts if we don't address them today, I would say it's civil rights, it's climate, and it's gun violence. And when I think about the people who are leading the conversation on those three issues, it might be a member of Congress here or there, but it's really the young people in this country whose voices have been marching and speaking out and tweeting and posting about these things, and policymakers are really beginning to listen. And so to me, I just think that a lot of times young people don't vote because they think their vote isn't going to matter. And I hope that you take a minute to pause and recognize that on those three big issues, your voices really matter, and they are driving change in this country. And the natural extension of your voice every year is at the ballot box. And I want you to go to that ballot box and vote for candidates who are going to address those three issues in the ways that you think are important. And so I'm bullish on young voter participation, because I see the impact you're already having on the debate. It doesn't mean that someone your age must be the person getting elected, although it'd be great if it is. What it does mean, though, is that you have an outsized role to play in this process. You just have to use not just your voice in marching, but your voice in voting when it comes time for that. And the last thing I'll say to you is, you have very soon here elections coming up for local school board, and you have elections coming up for township supervisor and district attorney and other municipal officials. Man, that's where the rubber meets the road. And if you're upset like me because you see an inequality in our education system, because Black and brown kids aren't learning in the same ways that white kids are because their districts aren't getting as much funding, well, let me tell you, those school board races are really important. If you care like me about criminal justice reform and you want to see change in the way we do policing or the way we prosecute people, well, you damn well better care about who gets elected district attorney in your communities. These races really matter on the things that I know are important to all of you and that you've been leading on. And I hope you engage and become a real part of this process. We really need you.
Yeah, and another reason I think that's so important, why I keep asking that question, is I have the opportunity to be in the classroom, or this year on the Zoom screen, with a lot of young people here at Brown, and they have the right values. This is really a terrific generation, and it's one of the things that keeps me optimistic about our national future.
Me too.
Yeah, great. John asks, would you be willing to state your opinion on the topic of police organization in Pennsylvania or nationally?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess
I can tell you, I mean, I've been at the forefront of leading, change in our criminal justice system.
Yeah.
One of the things I just worked on, which is now the law in Pennsylvania, is we created a police misconduct database so that we track all the misconducts of police officers so they can't go from jurisdiction A to jurisdiction B and have, questionable backgrounds, but that not be known to the mayor, the police chief, whomever who's making the hire. So, we've done a lot on reform. I've done a lot on reform within my office, but a lot more is needed.
Well, as a final question, we've heard a couple of times during the last hour and a half, a declaration or two from your dog. And
I'm sorry.
So no, not a problem. But we're all curious about who your dog is.
I think he's in the other room. But we have 2 dogs in our house. We have a Cavanese who's about 5 or 6 years old, and we have a brand new puppy who's a golden doodle. That's who you're hearing bark in the background. And between that, our 4 kids, who for a lot of the year were doing Zoom school, me working a lot from home, my wife being home, the dogs, it's been a little bit crazy here in the Shapiro household. So it's been a little nuts.
I know about that. We have a golden doodle here as well, and
there you go.
I was worrying that my 2 dogs might start answering back.
That's great.
Well, I want to thank you so much for really a great interview, and it's really a great pleasure to see you again. It's been a long time, I think something like 25 years. But as we said at the beginning, I hope in the future we'll get to have you back here at Brown live in person.
I really look forward to it. It's such a great school. First off, for the students who are there, and you are really blessed to be there. It's an amazing school. Soak it up. Follow your passion. Just study as much as you can that you're interested in. And by the way, thank your parents who are helping you be there. I think for a lot of you. And look, Rich, to you. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for being nice to me 25 years ago when you didn't have to be. It's something I've really learned in politics, that you gotta be nice to everybody along the way, and have a lot of interns, give them opportunities. You never know where you're going to inspire someone to really dedicate themselves to public service, and you taught me a lot of that. Carl did too, and I'm just really grateful to both of you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your kindness in saying that. And on behalf of our audience, thank you. One of the sad things about being on Zoom is that you can't see the standing ovation that you're receiving.
I feel it. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody, and stay in touch. You can find me on social media. Hit me up that way if you want. Josh Shapiro, PA. Look forward to staying in touch with all of you and hopefully seeing you in person. Rich, be well.
Bye-bye, you too.